Don't touch it!
Don't touch it. Please don't. The giant mail order. Bride warned. The lonely rancher did and froze at what happened next. Don't touch it. Don't. The giant widow's scream shattered the Wyoming silence when the lonely rancher's hand reached for her chest, but Hewitt Callahan's fingers had already made contact, and the moment he felt the cold metal hidden beneath her dress, he froze like a man who'd just grabbed a rattlesnake. She was chained to his fence post like an animal, this towering 6-foot woman named Tempest Blackwood, with wrists bleeding from iron shackles, and pinned to her cream-colored dress was a letter with one word that made his heart stop. Delivery. The lonely rancher hadn't ordered a giant widow, hadn't ordered anyone, but someone had delivered her to his Double C ranch in the dead of night. And now his calloused palm pressed against her heaving chest could feel something that shouldn't exist in 1883 America. A thick iron slave collar hidden under the high neckline, and engraved words that burned his fingertips like a brand. Property of Worthington Estate. The metal read, and below that in smaller letters, Return if found, 500 reward. The giant widow's warning, don't touch it, don't, came too late, because the lonely rancher had already felt the proof that she wasn't a woman at all in the eyes of the law. She was cargo, livestock, human property marked and priced and hunted. But here's what made Hewitt Callahan's blood turn to ice as he knelt frozen in the dirt, with his hand still pressed against the giant widow's racing heart. He recognized the Worthington name from the newspaper. They were the most powerful family in Boston. They owned judges and railroads and banks, and 3 months ago their escaped property had killed 2 bounty hunters during her run for freedom. The giant widow saw the recognition dawn in the lonely rancher's frozen face and whispered the words that would haunt him forever. They delivered me to you because you're alone, desperate, and far from witnesses. They think you'll either keep me chained and use me, or you'll return me for the reward money. But they never considered you might be the one man in Wyoming stupid enough to set me free. Hewitt's hand jerked away from her chest like he'd been burned, but the feeling of that cold iron collar stayed on his fingertips like a curse he couldn't shake. His mind raced through everything he knew about the Worthington family from the Boston newspapers that came through Salvation Creek every month. Shipping magnates, railroad tycoons, the kind of people who owned entire towns, and the politicians who ran them. And this woman chained to his fence had run from them, had killed to escape them, and now they dumped her on his property like she was a problem he was supposed to solve. The sun was barely up, painting the sky that soft pink color that usually made him think of new beginnings. But right now all Hewitt could think about was how alone they were out here, how far his ranch sat from town, how easy it would be for someone to make both of them disappear, and nobody would ask questions for weeks. He looked at Tempest's face, really looked at her, and saw past the size and the strength to the terror in those winter-gray eyes, the way her whole body trembled despite the muscle and the height, the way she was trying so hard not to cry that it made his chest ache. How long have you been wearing that collar? His voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with anger that wasn't meant for her. 6 months. She wouldn't meet his eyes now, just stared at the dirt like she was memorizing every pebble. Augustus put it on me the day after we married, said it was to remind me of my place, that I was bought and paid for just like the horses in his stable. I thought it was just his cruelty, his way of breaking me. I didn't know he'd had legal papers drawn up classifying me as property until after he died, and his brother Sebastian showed me the documents. Hewitt's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles went white. He'd been a rancher for 20 years, had seen animals treated with more dignity than what she was describing. Your husband's dead. That should have freed you. Should have. The bitterness in her laugh cut like broken glass. But Sebastian Worthington owns judges the way you own cattle. He found a corrupt lawyer who argued that because of my size and strength, Augustus had purchased me for labor, not companionship. They presented my marriage certificate to a judge who owed Sebastian money, and he ruled that I was domestic chattel, not a wife. When Augustus died, I didn't inherit, I got inherited, became property of the Worthington estate, along with the furniture and the silverware. The words made Hewitt physically sick. He'd lost his own wife Martha 3 years back, lost her and their unborn baby to complications he still didn't fully understand, and the grief had nearly destroyed him. But at least he'd had the right to grieve, the right to bury her with dignity, the right to speak her name without asking permission. This woman hadn't even been granted the basic humanity of widowhood. You ran. It wasn't a question. He could see the story written in the scars on her wrists, in the way she kept glancing toward the horizon like she was calculating escape routes even now. 3 months ago. Tempest's voice dropped to barely a whisper, and Hewitt had to lean closer to hear her. I ran in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on my back and $17 I'd stolen from Sebastian's desk over 6 months, a quarter at a time. Made it all the way to Chicago before the bounty hunters caught me in a boarding house. They were transporting me back to Boston when the train derailed outside of Cheyenne. Not a big derailment, a cow on the tracks, nothing serious. But in the confusion, one of the bounty hunters unlocked my chains to move me to a different car, and I saw my chance. You killed them. Hewitt said it flat, without judgment, because he'd already decided that whatever she'd done to those men, they deserved it for treating a human being like cargo. I didn't mean to kill them. Her voice cracked, and tears finally spilled down her cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. I just wanted to get away. I hit the first one hard enough to break his jaw, grabbed his gun, told them both to stay back. But the second one came at me anyway, said I was too valuable to let escape, that $500 was worth the risk. We fought. The gun went off. He fell. And then the first one, even with his broken jaw, he came at me screaming that I'd murdered his partner, that he'd make me pay. I hit him again, harder this time, and he went down and didn't get up. I didn't stay to check if they were breathing. I just ran. The confession hung in the air between them like smoke. And Hewitt understood with crystal clarity that they were both standing at a crossroads that would define everything that came after. He could go into his house right now, write a telegram to the Worthington estate, collect his $500, and tell himself he was just following the law. He could pretend this woman chained to his fence was someone else's problem, someone else's property, someone else's nightmare. Or he could do what every instinct in his body was screaming at him to do. He could set her free and damn the consequences. They didn't just dump you here by accident. Hewitt worked through the logic out loud, trying to understand the game being played. The Worthingtons are smart, calculating. They delivered you to my ranch specifically. Why? Tempest finally looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw a kind of broken intelligence that came from surviving monsters. Because 6 months ago, before I ran the first time, I heard Sebastian talking to his lawyer about contingency plans. He'd been tracking mail-order bride advertisements across the Western Territories, cataloging lonely ranchers, widowers, desperate men far from civilization. He said if I ever escaped, he'd deliver me to one of them. Let me think I'd found freedom. Let me settle in. Let me start to hope. And then, when I was most vulnerable, when I'd finally started to believe I might have a future, he'd come to collect me. He said breaking me a second time would be so much sweeter than the first. The cruelty of it stole Hewitt's breath. This wasn't just about property or money or even legal revenge. This was about psychological torture, about destroying a human soul for sport. And somehow, his lonely ranch in the middle of Wyoming nowhere had ended up as the stage for Sebastian Worthington's sick game. You answered my advertisement. The pieces clicked together in Hewitt's mind with sickening clarity. 4 months ago, I placed an advertisement in the Boston Globe for a mail-order bride. Strong woman wanted for ranch partnership, companionship, new beginnings. That was you who answered it, wasn't it? Before you ran. Tempest nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I read it 17 times before I got the courage to write back. You sounded kind in that advertisement, Mr. Callahan. You sounded like someone who might see me as a person instead of a thing. I wrote you a letter explaining everything. About Augustus, about the collar, about Sebastian's threats, and I begged you to help me. But I never got to send it. Sebastian found the letter in my room, and that's when everything went to hell. He knew I was planning to run, so he moved the collar from just around my neck to this. She gestured at the chains binding her wrists, and increased security. When I finally did escape 3 months later, it wasn't to come to you. I was just running blind, trying to get as far from Boston as possible. But Sebastian remembered my advertisement. Hewitt felt sick understanding the trap. He kept my information, and when his bounty hunters lost you after the train derailment, he decided to deliver you here anyway. Let you think you'd made it to the kind rancher from the newspaper. Let you believe you were safe. And then he'll come for me. Tempest finished his sentence, her voice hollow with certainty. Probably gave me a week, maybe 2, to settle in, to let my guard down, to start hoping. And when hope is burning brightest, that's when he'll arrive with his men and his legal papers and his bought judges, and he'll take me back in front of you so you can see exactly how powerless you are to stop him. It's not just about punishing me anymore, Mr. Callahan. It's about punishing you too, for daring to offer kindness to something he owns. Hewitt's hands moved to the buttons at Tempest's collar before his brain caught up with his heart, and she flinched so hard the chains rattled like thunder against the fence post. I need to see it, he said quietly, forcing his fingers to stay steady even though rage was burning through his veins like wildfire. I need to see what they did to you. She tried to shake her head, but he was already working the first button free, then the second, then the third, until the high neckline of her cream-colored dress fell open and revealed the iron collar in the full morning light. It was worse than he'd imagined. 3 inches of thick metal fitted so precisely around her throat that he could see where it had rubbed her skin raw and bleeding, could see the infection starting at the edges, could see how she'd been wearing this instrument of torture for so long that her body had started to scar around it like a tree growing around barbed wire. The engraving mocked him in elegant script. Property of Worthington Estate, Boston, Mass. And below that, return if found, 500 reward, like she was a lost dog instead of a human being with a beating heart and a soul that was screaming for freedom. There's a lock in the back. Tempest's voice was barely a whisper, thick with shame that made Hewitt want to burn Boston to the ground. Sebastian has the only key. He wore it on a chain around his neck, showed it to me every morning to remind me that he controlled whether I could breathe comfortably or not. Sometimes he'd tighten it just to watch me struggle. Hewitt walked behind her and found the lock, a complex mechanism that would need either the key or a hacksaw to remove. His fingers traced the edge of the collar and felt how the metal had worn grooves into her skin, how she must wake up every morning tasting iron and humiliation. I can get this off, he said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. I've got tools in the barn, a good hacksaw, and steady hands. It'll take time and it won't be comfortable, but I can free you from this. And then what? She turned her head as much as the collar would allow, trying to look at him. You cut off the collar. You're destroying Worthington property. That's a crime in their eyes, maybe even in the law's eyes, depending on which judge they've bought. You'll be a criminal just for showing me basic human decency. Hewitt walked around to face her again and knelt in the dust so their eyes were level, and what Tempest saw in his face made her breath catch because she'd never seen a man look at her like that before. like she mattered more than consequences, like her freedom was worth any price he'd have to pay. "Let me tell you something about being a criminal," he said, his voice steady as stone. "3 years ago, my wife Martha died in that house behind us, her and our baby both, because I was too busy working this ranch to notice she was struggling, too focused on building something impressive to pay attention to the woman who actually mattered. I've been a dead man walking ever since, going through motions, punishing myself with loneliness, because I figured that's what I deserved. But then you show up chained to my fence like some kind of horrible gift from hell, and for the first time in 3 years, I feel something besides guilt. I feel angry, Tempest. Angry that the world let this happen to you. Angry that men like Sebastian Worthington can buy judges and rewrite laws and turn human beings into property. And if becoming a criminal means I get to feel alive again, if breaking their evil laws means I can look at myself in the mirror without hating what I see, then hand me that hacksaw and let's get started." The words hit Tempest like a physical force, and suddenly she was crying in a way she hadn't cried since the night Augustus first locked the collar around her throat, big gasping sobs that shook her whole body and made the chains rattle. "You don't understand what you're offering," she managed between breaths. "Sebastian doesn't just have money and lawyers. He has killers on his payroll, men who've made people disappear for less than what you're talking about. If you help me, if you cut this collar off, he'll come for both of us, and he won't stop until we're either dead or destroyed." "Then let him come." Hewitt stood and pulled a key ring from his belt, selecting the small brass key that opened the wrist shackles. "But he'll find me ready, and he'll find you free, and he'll learn that not every lonely rancher in Wyoming is desperate enough or broken enough to participate in his sick games." He unlocked the first shackle and caught her wrist gently as it fell, cradling the damaged skin like it was something precious. The relief on her face when that first chain dropped away was so profound it made his chest ache, like watching someone take their first real breath after nearly drowning. He moved to the second shackle and paused, looking up at her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. "Before I unlock this, I need you to understand something. The moment these chains fall, you're not my property, and you're not Sebastian's property, and you're not anybody's property ever again. You're Tempest Blackwood, a free woman standing on free soil, and whatever happens next, we face it as equals. You understand me?" She nodded because words had abandoned her completely, and when he turned that key and the second shackle fell away, Tempest's knees buckled from the sheer weight of sudden freedom. Hewitt caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms wrapping around her substantial frame without hesitation, without judgment, without any of the disgust she'd learned to expect from men who touched her. "I've got you," he whispered against her hair while she sobbed into his chest. "You're safe now. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it together." They spent the next 2 hours in Hewitt's barn with the door barred and a loaded rifle within arm's reach, him working carefully with a hacksaw while she sat perfectly still on a wooden stool, trying not to think about what the blade might do if his hand slipped even a fraction of an inch. The metal collar was harder than he'd anticipated, forged from iron that had been designed to last forever, to mark her permanently, to remind her every single day that she belonged to someone else. Sweat poured down Hewitt's face as he worked, his muscles burning from the repetitive motion. But he didn't stop, and he didn't complain, because every stroke of that saw was an act of rebellion against everything the Worthington family represented. Tempest watched his face while he worked and saw something she'd almost forgotten existed: genuine goodness. The kind that didn't ask for anything in return, the kind that showed up even when it was dangerous and expensive and complicated. "Almost through," Hewitt muttered, and then with one final stroke, the saw broke through and the collar fell away in 2 pieces, clattering to the barn floor like the prison bars they'd always been. Tempest's hands flew to her throat, feeling the bare skin there for the first time in 6 months, feeling the air move freely across her neck, feeling like she'd been born again into a body that was finally, completely, undeniably her own. "It's gone," she whispered, running her fingers over and over the raw skin like she couldn't quite believe it. "It's really gone." Hewitt set down the hacksaw and reached for the jar of salve he'd brought from the house. His touch impossibly gentle as he began treating the wounds the collar had left behind. "It's gone, and it's never going back on," he said firmly. "I don't care how many lawyers Sebastian brings, or how many judges he's bought, or how much money he waves around. That collar is going in my forge, and I'm melting it down into horseshoes, and he can go straight to hell if he doesn't like it." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something crack open in Tempest's chest, some wall she'd built to survive that suddenly didn't need to exist anymore. She reached up and caught his hand, pressing it against her throat where the collar had been, letting him feel her pulse beating strong and free beneath his palm. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, searching his face for answers. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why risk everything for a stranger?" Hewitt's eyes met hers, and she saw 3 years of grief and guilt and loneliness staring back at her. Saw a man who'd been punishing himself for so long he'd forgotten what grace felt like. "Because Martha's dying taught me something," he said quietly. "It taught me that we don't get unlimited chances to do the right thing, that life gives us these moments where we can either step up or step back, and the choice we make defines who we really are when nobody's watching. I stepped back when Martha needed me most, got so caught up in building this ranch that I missed all the signs she was struggling. I won't make that mistake again. I won't look away when someone's suffering right in front of me, just because helping might be inconvenient or dangerous or complicated." He paused, his thumb brushing gently across the unmarked skin of her throat. "And maybe, just maybe, saving you is how I start saving myself." The words hung between them in the dusty barn light, heavy with truth and possibility. And Tempest realized with startling clarity that this lonely rancher with his calloused hands and broken heart was offering her something infinitely more valuable than freedom. He was offering her partnership, the chance to build something real with someone who saw her as human. "Sebastian will come," she said, not as a warning, but as a simple fact. "Probably within the week. He'll bring men and guns and legal papers, and he'll try to take me back." Hewitt stood and retrieved his rifle from where it leaned against the barn wall, checking the chamber with practiced ease. "Let him come," he said with a calmness that came from a man who'd already made his peace with whatever consequences lay ahead. "This is Wyoming territory, and out here we've got our own laws about how people treat each other. Sebastian Worthington might own half of Boston, but he doesn't own this ranch, and he doesn't own you, and he's about to learn that some things can't be bought no matter how much money you wave around." He extended his hand to her, not to pull her up, but simply as an offer, a choice freely given. "What do you say, Tempest Blackwood? You want to stay and fight beside me, or would you rather take a horse and ride as far from here as you can get? Either way, I'll support your decision." Tempest looked at his outstretched hand and thought about all the times men's hands had brought her nothing but pain. Thought about Augustus and Sebastian and every bounty hunter who'd treated her like cargo instead of a person. But Hewitt's hand was different. It was offering instead of taking, asking instead of demanding, respecting her choice instead of making it for her. She reached out and clasped his hand firmly, feeling the strength in his grip, feeling the calluses that came from honest work, feeling the slight tremor that told her he was just as scared and uncertain as she was, but choosing courage anyway. "I stay," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "I stay, and we fight together, because I'm done running and I'm done letting evil men dictate my future. If Sebastian wants me back, he'll have to go through both of us. And something tells me that's a fight he's not prepared for." Hewitt's answering smile was the first genuine one she'd seen on his face, and it transformed him from lonely rancher to something else entirely. Partner, protector, friend, maybe eventually more. Then let's get ready, he said, squeezing her hand once before releasing it. We've got a week to turn this ranch into a fortress and prepare for war, and I've got a feeling that when the dust settles, Sebastian Worthington is going to regret the day he ever delivered you to my fence. They walked out of that barn together into the bright Wyoming sunshine, two broken people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and decided that broken didn't mean defeated, that scarred didn't mean weak, that starting over was possible even when the world said it wasn't. The road ahead would be dangerous and bloody and filled with uncertainty. But for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, they weren't facing it alone. And somewhere deep in both their hearts, underneath all the fear and trauma and pain, something small and fragile and precious began to grow. Hope that maybe this time the story would end differently, that maybe this time love would win, that maybe this time the giant widow and the lonely rancher would get the happy ending that life had tried so hard to deny them. Before we end this story, I want to ask you something important. What time is it where you're watching this right now? And what part of the world are you calling home today? Drop a comment below and let me know, because I love knowing that stories like Tempest and Hewitt's are reaching people across different countries and time zones, connecting us all through the universal language of hope and second chances. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, if it reminded you that courage and kindness still matter in this complicated world, do me a favor and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. Because there are more tales like this one waiting to be told, more people like Tempest and Hewitt who deserve to have their stories heard, and I want to make sure you're there when we share them. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And remember, no matter what chains life has put on you, no matter how trapped or hopeless you feel, there's always someone willing to pick up that hacksaw and fight for your freedom. You just have to be brave enough to let them try.
Once again, Tales from the Wild West sends a huge thank you to all of you. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep creating. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.